And we want to welcome everyone back to the 5th Taking Nature Black Conference. This is our afternoon panel, Bigger and Bolder, Building Black Environmental Impact. In a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves before we jump right into the discussion. But I will say that all of our panelists have one thing in common, just incredible resumes and a motivating drive to do things that are big and creative and imaginative. And I'm sure that what they have to say is really going to help all of us to kind of do the same, to think bigger and attempt to do and think bigger in terms of the environmental space. To begin the introduction, I'm going to ask Chanceé Lundy Russell to start. But first, I want to say that Chanceé is a member of our Nature Forward Board of Directors that we're very proud of. And she came to become more engaged with our organization through a past Taking Nature Black conference. So I really hope that all of us who are participating today in attendance think about engaging with Nature Forward following the conference and participating either in one of our programs if you're in the DC region or joining as a member. We really want to invite you to learn more about our organization. So now I'll turn it over to Chanceé, and then each of you will introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really want to just echo what Vince said in terms of just joining the organization, seeing about all of the wonderful programs that we have for individuals and for families. I think that Nature Forward is just an awesome organization. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the board of directors. So take a minute, join, find out a little bit more about the organization. I'm really happy to be a board member, and I'm happy to be back at the Taking Nature Black Conference. As Vince said, my name is Chanceé Lundy Russell. I hail from the great Selma, Alabama. I'm a native of Selma, Alabama. And I come to this space as someone who was formerly trained in environmental engineering and environmental science. I got my start many, many, many years ago. I remember one of my first internship with U.S. Forest Service back in the day, teaching environmental education. But since that time, I've had an opportunity to work in corporate America, doing greenhouse gas emissions reductions, solid waste, a plethora of things, and actually owning my own environmental consulting firm for over 11 years here in Washington, D.C., where I had an opportunity to work on a lot of environmental infrastructure projects, doing public engagement, climate action plans, working on stormwater management, just a host of things, being able to use my technical and community skills. And this is really where I got my start. I actually sold that firm in 2020, and it is still flourishing here in the DC region and actually far south too. So it's still flourishing. But now I get a chance to kind of explore other things. I work in philanthropy. So I work on issues facing Black girls and women in the South, but I also still do my environmental consulting work as well. And right now I've been able to work with organizations through the Department of Energy who are working on some really cool renewable energy projects. So right now I'm just using my skills in a couple of different places and working on like passion projects, but those things that bring me joy, but also I work on things that make sure that we continue to be good stewards of this world that God has given us.
Thank you. Larry?
Thank you. Excellent. Good afternoon. I am Larry Glover. I am CEO of my company, the Glover Group. We're a strategic marketing and consulting firm that focuses on community engagement. Our focus is on LMI, low to moderate income communities, and disadvantaged communities as defined by the Department of Energy and government. I am, by way of background and training, I am a multicultural SME or subject matter expert. I've spent a lot of time across industries and have spent actually my education professional training is that as a classical marketer. I've worked for major corporations, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, those kind of spaces. In the last 17 years, I've actually focused on taking those skills and transferable skills and looked at the energy industry and have looked at it from a broader standpoint of its development and what does that really mean for communities. A really kind of short piece. My motivation here is really from a comment made by a senior guy when I was a young Turk in the field. And he said, when you get all of this training and you then apply it to our community, you're really going to make a difference. And that really has kind of been my centered piece for the work that I do. And over the 17 years, I've looked at the energy industry, I've looked at its shifts, I've looked at its changes, I've looked at how can we ensure that companies, corporations, and communities can work together and be collaborative and do their best work. So for me, this is a really great opportunity to bring a perspective that says, where are we in this industry and what's the impact for us as a community, and what do we do next? So I'm looking forward to the conversation that we will have today, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Thank you, Larry. And Victoria?
Good afternoon to my esteemed panel members. It's great being with you all today, and to Nature Forward and the Taking Nature Black Conference attendees. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Victoria Owens. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the Southwest region, and that encompasses New Mexico, Arizona, Oklahoma, and Texas. I got my start as a wildlife inspector trainee many years ago. I was just sharing with the panelists, I got a chance to work at the Port of Miami as a trainee doing live wildlife inspections. Then I progressed to become a wildlife inspector full-time, and then landed my dream job as a special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I've gotten to work in beautiful places, Columbus, Ohio, Honolulu, Hawaii, as well as headquarters here in the DMV area. And now I am the SAC of the Southwest region. So it's great to be with you all today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Tamara joining us from the West Coast.
Well, good morning from California. It's still morning over here. My name is Tamara Rasberry Harris, and I am the acting executive director of the 40 Acre Conservation League based here in California. I am a 20-year veteran of the state capital community, having served as a public servant, a lobbyist and advocate, and most recently I started my own firm doing consulting and came on board with 40 Acre Conservation League in helping build capacity for the organization. We're a new organization, started in 2021. And I'm very excited to be here because you're saying all my favorite words: Black, nature, progress, moving forward. This is I met Vincent on just a Google search as we were planning our own conference to make sure that that the title wasn't being used. And I found your conference and thought, well, I need to hear what's going on. And when I reached out to Vince, he asked me to be a panelist. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you. I want to start out because time will go fast on this. So I want to jump right into the discussion, and each of you jump in, as you think about things that you want to contribute. I want to start with, if you kind of think back, what's the best advice, the most impactful advice you've received in your career, whether it's about career or entrepreneurial opportunity, and let me start with you, Chanceé. What's the best advice that you got? What's the best advice you would give to someone in terms of doing something really meaningful in the environmental movement?
I think whether it's in the environmental movement or something else, whatever your dreams or aspirations might be, some of the best advice that I got, and I find myself repeating this often to other people, is that when you step out, the universe will open up to accept you. And I found that to be helpful when I started my own business. Whatever new endeavors and projects that I have, is that whatever idea I have, if I just step out you know, the universe always opens up to accept me some way. Some people find me, they invest in me, they send me a word of encouragement. It seems like things just start flowing from different places. So it's just you taking that first step, you taking a risk, and the universe will open up to accept you.
Very encouraging. Larry, let me ask you the same question. Best advice that you received and best advice you would give?
Was that me?
Yeah, yeah. I was going to
Yes.
ask. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Yes. First, let me say that we are in unprecedented times, particularly when we look at opportunities, when we look at what is available for us. In terms of advice, it really goes back to that old sense where people would say, find a job that you like rather than something that feels like a job. And while that is that old saying, and we've all heard it, but I put it in today's context. We live in a world and we work in an environment where this idea of value-aligned concepts become really important. When we see the number of people, and particularly, and I'm gonna call them millennials and Gen Zs, who are in fact making job decisions based on whether or not the company aligns with the values that they have. They will go to work for a company that will pay them less, but they believe in the work that this company is doing and they are committed to it. It feels very much not like a job. I lived in there, and I've had the job where every morning you get this knot in your stomach because you got to go and do something that you don't really like, but you're doing it for another reason. So the advice for me is find something that doesn't feel like a job. But secondly, in the work that you do, make that a greater impact than the job that you have. And that's what I would say. In the work that you do and what you put into that, walk away so that your presence there has been recognized and is bigger than the job that they gave you.
Great advice. Victoria, you know, you see so many people who are interested in advancing their careers in the service. What advice would you give? What advice did you get that you found was helpful?
I love this question because it allowed me the opportunity to really reflect and think back. Being with Fish and Wildlife Service now for over 20 years, I've had a lot of advice, you know, and I have so many people to thank who have contributed to who I am today. But lately, I've been really holding on to some information that I received during one of our workforce presentations. With Fish and Wildlife Service, we're so fortunate to have presenters come and share. I think it was around 2017 where John C. Robinson, an African-American ornithologist who worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, came and spoke to our workforce. John's also an author of Birding for Everyone. And in his presentation, he was sharing an experience that he had in the birding community. It was an exchange that kind of caused him to have an epiphany. Before, he felt as though he needed permission to go bird watching and be in that space as an African-American male. But in a moment during this exchange, he realized that he did not need permission to be a part of the community. He knew he had something to contribute. That kind of resonated with me. I'm doing a lot of diversity work within the Office of Law Enforcement. And when I have these conversations, when I'm talking about diversity as it relates to diversity of thought and experiences, and as it relates to us making our workforce better, I oftentimes use the analogy of the Avengers. Like, we are all needed, we all are superheroes, and we all bring something to the table. So as I am now, you know, bringing my full self, I know that I have something to contribute. I belong. Also, I'm reflecting on Dr. Mamie Parker, one of our keynote speakers today. She's the first African-American Fish and Wildlife Service Regional Director of the Northwestern states. She came and spoke to our workforce as well. And I'm paraphrasing her words, but she made mention that the Fish and Wildlife Service, we're really good at making plans, and we have enough plans, and that now it's time for us to act. It's time for us to do. And so that also resonates with me. I think it's profound, and thinking that we may have a tendency to be overly prepared or overanalyze our plans. But if you have goals, you belong in workspaces and in workplaces, and act on your goals, like go for it. So that's just really been giving me a lot of courage lately. And I just pass that on to others that, you and your whole self bring so much to organizations. You belong, and go for it.
Awesome. Hey, Tamara, I'm going to ask you, and especially in the context of what you're doing out in California, because it's something very big, very ambitious. And I've got to believe along the way, you've had people who said it couldn't be done.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not even along the way. Someone told me a month ago that we're being very ambitious. So our organization, 40 Acre Conservation League, is the first Black-owned and managed land conservancy in California. And we are in the process of acquiring private land and actually turning it over into a public conservancy that is physically a safe space for African Americans outside and in nature. And just last week, a state senator told us, well, yeah, what you're doing, he didn't say it's impossible, but he said, this is completely up against the norm. You're saying words that people aren't used to hearing, and it's going to be jarring to them. And this is in, ultra left leaning progressive California. And we're finding these hurdles because we're trailblazing, but that's nothing new for me. I started my career in the state capitol as a young assembly postgraduate fellowship program. And probably the best advice I got was from a lobbyist or another staffer who said, don't let them pigeonhole you. You're a Black woman. They're going to want you to go into human services and social services as a policy area. And I started off doing that, but then I remember what this staffer said, and I took opportunities where I was the only Black person in the room. And I'm not talking about like in just a conference room, I'm talking about in auditoriums, especially when I worked on environmental work, the cap and trade regulations in California, anything outside the norm. So if you don't see a lot of Black people in the service area, you're not going to have a lot of Blacks on the structure and professional side. And I was often the only one. And one thing that I tell a lot of new staffers or new lobbyists in California, African American staffers, and some of the young ladies I mentor, is claim your space in the room. I never shied back from being the only one in the room. And even if it wasn't my job to advocate for African American voice, I appointed myself the voice. And so even if it wasn't in my job description that I had to advocate for it, I found all opportunities I could to advocate for African Americans on that issue. Even I used it from just my own perspective. I didn't have a background in electric vehicle charging stations, but I made sure that in the conversation that the consideration of where they were going was considered, because I felt like no one else is having that conversation. I need to be the one to say it. And at first it was a little scary, but if no one else is saying it, I had to be the one to do it. And I've kind of taken that and made it a career for myself.
Could I add?
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Just one other thing, particularly as I listen to the conversation. And I'd like to say, for us, people use this phrase, think out of the box, and I hate it because it means that we start in a box and we don't start in a box. But it is important for us to start to think about things that were before unimaginable. Victoria, with your work, I have a young son who wants to be a wildlife biologist. Man, I would like for him to meet you. But when we begin to think beyond what the traditional levels are, I think we then start to unbake these opportunities or unbundle these opportunities that today are almost as unlimited as your imagination.
It's so important. I was going to ask, I mean, imagination and determination are hugely important. I mean, we're not going to achieve big things if we don't think about achieving big things. But clearly the reality is there are obstacles in the way. Chanceé, let me start with you. The struggle is real for us. How do we navigate ourselves to success in difficult times, in difficult situations?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we have had a problem. I shouldn't say we don't have a problem, but we have a track record of navigating ourselves to success in difficult situations. If you have ever, I'm from the South, if you have ever looked on election day and you see long lines that people are in for 10 hours, we have a spirit of determination and persistence. I just don't know of people who have that same spirit of determination and persistence. Like, that is us. That is who we are. Like, you put I don't think that the obstacle should be there, but you put an obstacle in front of us and we just see that as another thing that we got to go through. And I don't think that, that's not said in any kind of way, that I feel like should be uplifting, but it's like, we just got to do what we got to do. And that spirit we have from our ancestors is who we've always been. We've always taken nothing and made a lot of something out of it. We've put love in it. Like, we continue to fight, but we continue to have hope. And I think that hope that things will change, that hope that we know that we've seen this incremental progress, and we're not going to say a lot of progress, but we've seen this incremental progress over time, that I can think back, like, especially being from a town like Selma, like this past weekend, they have like the annual bridge crossing jubilee, and the president Joe Biden was there, and all these people. But like, my mom was in that march. She was only 11 years old, so I'm not far removed from people who really struggled and were determined just for everyone else to have certain freedoms. And so I know that for me and for my family, for the people that I know, like, obstacles, determination is nothing new. But it's like, as we make progress, how do we make sure that we're not losing what we have? And what we see now is barriers being put in place in terms of education within the school systems. We're making issues out of things that were never issues. We're making problems where there weren't. We're making solutions where there were no problems. So I think that for us, we just have to continue to have hope, but we have to work. I'm one of those people who I always used to tell people that faith without works is dead. Like, without you putting your foot forward, without you doing something to hope for something, to wish for something, it's not enough. It's like, what work are you doing? How are you doing things in your community? How are you organizing other people around issues? What is it that you bring to the table? So for me, it's not necessarily that obstacles are in a way. It's like, how am I going to get around this obstacle? How am I going to build a stronger tool? How am I going to be more resilient? How am I going to be more creative? And I think that we were talking about just a little bit earlier. One of the things I heard Larry say is, like, we talk about the new generation, and the new generation may not use the same tools that our grandmothers that they use, and they have all kind of slogans. Some I disagree with, but there are all kind of slogans and stuff out there, and they may fight a different way, and that's okay. Because what we're trying to make is progress within our communities, for the people that we love. Like, my son has asthma, and I don't feel like he should have to have asthma just because of where we live, just because that we have a reputation in our communities for being overburdened with pollution, no matter our class, but just strictly based on our race. So I think that we are consistently trying to imagine new ways to overcome the obstacles, the barriers, those things that are put in our way. And I think that we have to think about, like, okay, you put that's there. We already know that exists. Like, how do I get around it? How do I get over it? What am I going to do to bring people along? It's not the people who are already walking with us, but how do I bring new people to the fold? So that's where I am. Like, I don't think that in terms of obstacles, and that's nothing new. That's been there. That's just who we are. We've had obstacles in this country since, 1619. So we just gonna keep on, figuring out a new way, a new path around it.
Anyone else want to add to that before I go to another question?
Sure.
This is a great
The
point.
struggle is absolutely real. You know, let's recognize. But heretofore, and Chanceé, I like the idea that we got to look at different ways and different tools, and how do we begin to define where we are and what those challenges are. But the route to success, I believe, is through collaborative partnerships, finding the right kind of partners that work. We are in a world now where, well, historically, we've always relied on the single inventor, the single great mind. You know, it's the person in their garage who makes this great thing and all of a sudden changes our lives. I think that's different today. And particularly when we're talking about environmental kinds of things and things that are close to us, I think it requires unique partnerships. And I think we have to weed out, we have to find the right partner. It's not about anybody. But if I'm putting up charging stations in a community, and I know that community is also trying to do electrification, man, I need to create partnerships so that the end work that we do for that community is greater than the benefit of me putting in 6 charging stations and somebody else doing something else. So I believe that the struggle is real. The way out is often not by yourself, but it's finding those unique allies and partners that will help you to travail those paths.
You know, with
Vincent,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
I just wanted to add that the in our work here in California, and probably in all of you in the work that you do, I don't know if it's age, like I'm 48 now, or just, you know, experience. I'll put it in. It's 2023, and I am no longer downplaying how I'm centering Blackness in all of my work professionally. And I'm not downplaying it to make you feel comfortable, nor am I going to relinquish my space so that this could move forward seamlessly. And just to give an example, last year, we actually were advocating for a budget allocation, and we were specifically saying Black climate reparations. And we're also in a conversation, I was told by another elected official, well, if you say Black, you can't, the funding won't happen. California has a law that was passed 25, almost 30 years ago now, that prevented, it was like the anti quotas law, that's what they called it. And so California can't, this government can't put out contracts or bid with using race-based specifications. But that doesn't apply to what we were talking about. It doesn't apply in a state budget allocation, but that has been the norm for the last 20 years. And so to be told, well, if you say you want climate reparations for Black people, we weren't saying Black communities, we were saying Black people, that would go, that's kind of a non-starter. But if you said people of color or disadvantaged communities, and so by relinquishing my centering of Blackness, we're relinquishing the benefit to Black people on the issue that we were working on. Because if we otherize it, then we don't see the benefit directly to Black people. Because in California, we don't have large Black communities, right? We're spread out, we're urbanized, we're suburbanized, we're ruralized. So, you know, outside of LA, you don't really see, or here in Oakland where I am, tight-knit Black communities throughout the state. And so we have to specify Black people to make sure that we cover our people, but then that's just another example of being told not to center our Blackness because it made other people uncomfortable. So at 48 years old, I'm done doing that.
Wow.
I am so glad to hear that. I mean, that could be another 2-hour discussion in and
Right.
of itself. Definitely for me. You know, with this conference, Taking Nature Black, people have gotten used to it over the last 5 conferences, but every time we start to promote, we will hear from people who are uneasy with it being named Black. But that's important. I mean, that's a key to what we are doing and what we're about. And it's okay for us to represent that way, but it's challenging. And the times are getting more challenging. I live in Florida, and you talk about a state that's trying to turn the clock back in terms of inclusion. I mean, they are fast tracking turning it back. So it's tough. So you know, that's why I asked about the question of struggle. And I think it is a good point to recognize that that's always a part of what we have to do and who we are. And that like kind of leads me to my next question in terms of opportunities, not focusing on the challenges, even though we know that they're there. But how do we recognize and how do we keep our eyes open for opportunities that are out there? And let me start with you, Victoria. Let's talk in terms of career. You know, what's the best thing that people could do to think about opportunities that are out there career-wise?
So I would like to kind of blend the two questions together, because I think one part that was important to highlight in your past question was about navigating those struggles. So I agree with my panelists, like the struggles are going to be there. I know for myself, I struggled the most when I was in the military. I was a military police officer, and the struggle was real. That's a different workplace than the current workplace that I'm in, but my strategy was the same in navigating around some of the challenges. For me, I really, it was about mindset. It's always been about mindset. I grew up, I had a family of 5 sisters and my dad single parent raised me. And then I also played sports competitively in college. So I've always had this, you know, relentlessness and mindset to kind of see a struggle and navigate around it. And also with my upbringing, there was just nothing I couldn't do. There were no off-limit jobs and chores around the house. So currently in my position and in life, I just look at ways to focus on what's going to move the needle, right? So focus on what's going to, you know, really create an impact. There will be struggles. Yes, I think it's important to call that out. I think there will be closed doors, rejection. You'll hear no. You may find it difficult to be in workplaces where they lack diversity. However, if you're hyper focused on that to a fault, I think that that's going to cause a blockage, or it's going to take away from your ability to be able to creatively think about change and think about solutions and think about ways to move the needle. I also really rely on support groups and mentors to kind of help hold you up and be there for you when those days do become challenging and when you do run into different struggles. I think Larry talked about it earlier about collaborating. I think that's the important piece to this as well. You're going to need folks in your corner to advocate on your behalf, to support you emotionally when you're trying to navigate through these struggles. Not to stay in that space, but to vent, release that energy, and then put energy towards creating collaborative, creative solutions. As far as opportunities within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement, I am extremely excited. This might be an exclusive, I don't know, but we have some new positions that are going to be coming up. There are wildlife inspector positions, and our wildlife inspectors are uniformed officers. They're on the front lines. This was me back in the day, many years ago, as a SCEP student at the Port of Miami. These are our frontline employees who are helping to combat wildlife, trafficking and to monitor the legal and illegal import-export trade. We have so many wonderful wildlife inspectors. This is Camille Sims. She's currently a wildlife inspector, but I just want to encourage the audience to kind of keep your eyes open for those opportunities through USA Jobs in the next few months. It will be one of the type of announcements that are going to open and close very quickly. It's about 45 positions. So go ahead and start loading up your USA Jobs profiles and getting your resumes dusted off, because we would love to see applicants from this conference apply and be competitive for these positions. So thank you for asking the question.
Larry, I want to ask you too, specifically about opportunities, because I mean, especially with money that's out there to combat
Yes.
climate,
Yes.
what should we be thinking about?
Wow. So I'd like to approach that question from the other side of the coin, and to see what kind of opportunities that really exist. They are tremendous. And when we recognize that the government has just spent or allocated $1.3 trillion around this energy space, and what does that look for us as opportunity? Well, if we look at it only as an energy spend, it's not very much of an opportunity, or it's somewhat limited. But if we look at it and how we can influence those dollars and those programs to impact our communities, Tamara, that's your piece of keeping the community centered. But when we look at it that way, there are tremendous opportunities. This $1.3 trillion is the largest spending that this government has ever done in the last 50 years. But the impact of that $1.3 trillion, there are a couple of things. One, it's written in a way that puts communities front and center for the benefit of those dollars. And therein lies opportunities, business opportunities, workforce development opportunities, new initiatives for communities. Part of that plan requires that anyone who pulls down those government dollars have to provide a community benefits plan along with that application. And so when we start to look at what the benefits to the community look like, and our communities, we need the benefit of having fresh waterways, and how does our environments look? Those are part of community benefits plan that nobody ever thinks about. They think you put up a structure somewhere, or you run some lines in, and that's great because that's what they get. But our community is so much more. We talked about the impact of tree shades, and what does that look like? And how do we now bake this into what should happen in our communities as these monies are being spent? I think there are tremendous opportunities. And to your point, we could probably have another 2-hour discussion about the details and the nuances of how do we get involved in those opportunities, or how do we influence those dollars so that the work that's done benefits our community. Sometimes we don't always have to do it. We have to be able to ensure that the resources and the impact goes to our community. That's almost as important as doing it ourselves. But the money's there, the opportunities are there, and for young entrepreneurs and bright-sided folks, that's part of this whole piece in be imaginative and find new ways to bring value.
Tamara, anything you want to add to that? I mean, the work that your organization is doing is very forward-looking and really quite ambitious. How can other communities see the same type of opportunity to replicate what you're doing?
I think what Mr. Glover said earlier is building partnerships. A lot of our work, our early success in being successful in getting that budget allocation I described earlier for funding for the organization. They removed climate reparations out of the line, but we did receive the state funding. towards the purchase of land to add to the conservancy portfolio. But it was about partnerships and finding community where you least expect it. One of our partners is an outdoor hunting group, and which is, you think, gun toting, with the little red hats on and stuff, but they're actually conservationists at heart, and they believe in access to the land for everyone for their recreation. But for a lot of people, it's, hunting is not just recreation, it's their business, it's their livelihood. So finding partnerships where you kind of really have to dig down to the most common denominator and moving forward in that, having these type of conversations is wonderful, but be unmoving in your purpose. I think that's another thing that has made us successful, is we didn't dilute our message. I saw there was a question about BIPOC. We don't say BIPOC. We say Black and communities of color, but we're centering Blackness in the conversation. And like I said, it's jarring. I use it as comfortable as I'm saying it to you. I say it to an audience when, it's a non-Black audience also. And sometimes they're like, oh, I could see the reaction on their face processing, can we have this conversation? But when I say, outdoor spaces are perceived and sometimes actually not safe for Black people. It's a concept that is so foreign. It's like me telling them the sky is blue, like, wait, what? Like something that's so obvious to a lot of people, just something they've never considered before. And when I open with that conversation, for the person who's listening, it takes them back to, okay, when I went camping, yeah, I didn't see any Black people. When I go hiking, yeah, I don't see any Black people. So it brings them to a space where they can identify with me, and then we move the conversation forward. That's what finding, like, just a message and sticking to it, and using that and building community in places you wouldn't expect it, I think are essential to moving your mission forward.
And Vince, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up some of the other opportunities that I forgot to mention earlier. We also are using, when the question talks about legislation, and other opportunities, it made me think of our direct hiring authority. We are, seeing more and more in the Fish and Wildlife Service and in Office of Law Enforcement, us using, pathways positions, which our direct hiring authority, or using opportunities to get interns in our workforce, using like all of the federal direct hiring authority tools that we can to be creative about, creating a more diverse workforce. I'm very proud of some of the work that Office of Law Enforcement has been doing with our targeted recruitment strategy, using some of the demographics data of our workforce and seeing ways that we can make improvements with our recruiting and outreach efforts, and just doing a better job of reaching and educating people about OLE careers. We were recognized by the secretary for some of our diversity efforts. So we are making, it's incremental change. I believe one of the panelists mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're still doing the work, focusing on what's going to move the needle, So I just wanted to share that as well, that we do have, much more focused efforts on creating a more diverse workforce through our MOUs with universities, and just using creative hiring approaches.
If I could add just one insight, what you're saying, and if I draw from my experience as a marketer and working with consumers, part of our biggest challenge is exposure and helping our communities to really understand the work that we do. It's often clouded under this, baked under this short cloud that people really don't know what it is, to work in the fish and wildlife area, and what does that mean, and where are all of these other opportunities. We suffer from a lack of exposure to what they are, and I think when we begin to know, we begin to create some excitement, some curiosity. So if we do nothing else, we should try and expand this idea of knowledge of where these opportunities are.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Even knowing about a Fish and Wildlife Service special agent, I oftentimes say that had it not been for my dad, who was also a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service special agent, I'm not sure that I would have known to aspire to that. So I agree with you. We have to do better with getting more exposure. We are ramping up our outreach efforts, and we will be partnering with one of our other programs within the Fish and Wildlife Service at the upcoming Manners Conference. I agree with you. We have to get out there. We can no longer, put announcements on USA Jobs and, just expect people to come. You have to get out there and get the word and spread the message. That's why I'm so grateful and thankful to be here today. I use this as an opportunity to share about Office of Law Enforcement careers and about my path, which was a little different. So I agree with you, Mr. Glover. You're right. We have to do a better job of getting the word out there.
Related to that, and I want to start with you, Chanceé. How imperative is it for us to spread this kind of message to children, to our youth, to get them thinking in productive terms and thinking, seeing what opportunities are out there. How is that important, and how is that important to you?
So I think a couple ways I'm going to try to level that with the previous questions you asked about the opportunities just in general. I think that there's also an opportunity around entrepreneurship that we don't discuss enough, and community development. And I say that as someone who on January 12th, a tornado hit my hometown. And what I have seen in the aftermath of that, I went home immediately, and to see the neighborhoods that you grew up in no longer there, to see people's houses that you used to go to, the candy lady, like her house to be completely decimated. And in that tornado, no one died in Selma. But what I have seen in the aftermath of that is I have seen people die from heart attacks, from the stress of losing absolutely everything. And what I also saw, though, was immediately people, there's a phrase we use sometimes, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. What I saw immediately was people who swooped in, who had trucks, who had licenses, who had bonding, who were doing some of the same things that people in our community already know how to do: drywall, roofing, painting, and they were already ready to go. They could already get hired when money was coming in from the government. They already had all the paperwork. They had all the things they needed in place to be hired. And I think that for us, we have to make sure climate change is here. We're trying to do things to mitigate it, but we're also trying to we're building resilience, but we also have to build back after we experience natural disasters. And how do we make sure that we're ready, not only to build back, but that we're also a part of the process, the process of all that money, that $1.3 trillion. It's not enough to me just to say that money is going to flow to my community. I want my community to be able to build wealth off of that money as well. And that includes pipeline. So whether you're going into the professional sector or you're going into the trades, we need people who can do all things. All things. I think there are 3 entrepreneurs who are on this call doing very different things. I have a child sick home from school, so you may hear him in the background. But we can do all things. And I think that it's important for us, as we talk about building these pathways, that we're talking about people who are in different sectors who may not see themselves in a traditional space. And we talk about community development. You have a town that has been completely decimated, not just Selma, it's happening all over. How do we build the town that you want to see so that it doesn't become a place where you can't even live in? It isn't even recognizable to you, because now other people have saw the opportunity that is there. And we've seen that in countless communities across the country, that when the build back comes, you can't even afford to live in that place anymore. And how are we building with more resilience? Larry, you talked about infrastructure. There are people who know that when you get some money here in Selma, we need to build a sewer system, because we tired of having flooding every time it rains. So there are things that we know. In terms of young people, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to work on is just doing environmental education, but it isn't always what we think it is. Like, let me teach you some environmental education. My child now, and I haven't even been the one to tell him this, kind of ashamedly, if he thinks somebody about to throw a piece of paper somewhere, are they gonna litter? Did they litter like that? I'm like, oh, like, okay. You know what I mean? So kids are already learning some of this stuff, and I think that we have to, I was talking to a friend just the other day about getting her child ready for prom, and she, they want to do a big rental car. She's from Chicago. In Chicago, they do a big for prom. It's a whole thing. And I was like, oh, what does she want? A Lamborghini? We just going through all of the things, right? And she was like, she wants a Tesla. I was like, a Tesla? Like, but she was like, girl, these teenagers and these electric vehicles, like, they are on it. So like the young people are already knowing, they have, the messaging has been working in terms of protecting our environment, conserving our environment. But what we need to do is show them more of what you can do. So if you're in marketing, if you're in communications, if you are in the technical space, whether you're a biologist, whatever field you're in, this is how it applies and what you can do within this environmental space. This is what you can do to build resilience, mitigation against climate change. This is how you can protect your community. If you do graphic design, we need you to do some rendering of what we want this space to look like, what we want this park to look like after this is what we want. We want you to draw to conceptualize it for us so that people can see what we want. There are all types of opportunities, because I still want you to follow your passion, but how can you use your passion to help your community?
Yes. Oh.
Vincent, can I add? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Glover.
No.
I've done a lot of work in voter registration and voter outreach. I was formerly Deputy Secretary of State for California, and in trying to get young people interested in voting, I realized that adults were centering themselves and saying, listen, young people, this is what you need to know. And I came across a teacher who asked their students to make a campaign poster on the issues that are most important to them. And so they got to say, well, these are the issues that are important to me. And this is at Oakland High School, right in the middle of Oakland, a large public school. Mm-hmm. And it's, all majority people of color. It's a reflection, the racial dynamics is exactly the racial dynamics of Oakland, just to give you a background. But the top issues, the posters that the kids made, their issues were environmental, police brutality, and homelessness. And those were the issues they were concerned about the most. So how do you get kids interested in voting? Okay, well, those are the issues they're interested in the most. So show them how voting can positively impact those issues they care about. So I think for getting kids involved, we should listen to them and find out what they're interested in. If someone's doing this work has exposed me to more Black biologists than I ever knew existed. And those who study birds, frogs. There's a gentleman at UC Berkeley who's an expert in frogs. And because he got that time to, I think he grew up in Florida. And so he was walking around picking up frogs, snakes, all kind of little critters, but that piqued an interest in him. So feed the kids what they're interested in and then show them what's available. If they're interested in bugs and wildlife, have them explore the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website and see what's on there, right? If they're interested in green technology for, Teslas, and they're concerned about the environment, we'll feed that, show them what's possible there.
When I ran my business in the broader consumer marketplace, we'd always say to clients, when we're talking about Black communities, and we were talking Black communities at that point in time, we always had to translate the definitions. Because when our clients talked about the environment, they were talking about ozone layer and they were talking about carbon. But when they talked about communities and talked about environment, they're talking about the wastewater that's down the street, or how do I get my child from here to school and got to walk through this hazardous waste area that's been unclean. And so when we begin to redefine what environment means for us, we start to see bigger and broader opportunities for us to participate. And when we look at, and I'll say this, when we follow the money, and we know that the feds have allocated this money, but what happens is they send it to the states. The states then send it to the counties, and the counties are the one who makes those decisions about which projects get funded. So when we are smart about what we're doing, we follow the money and we know how to go to the county. We know how to go to our legislators and influence where those dollars are being spent in our communities. That's really what it means about ferreting and understanding new opportunities. I mean, we are only limited about how creative we can be. And Chanceé, to your point at the very beginning, we've always been creative. We've always been resilient. We've always been able to get up 8 times after we've been knocked down 7. That's just our DNA. So yeah, I think there's a great level of excitement for what's ahead of us. We just have to imagine ourselves in the right spot.
We just have about a few minutes left. We're about almost out of time, but I do want to ask you each about making connections, and how would you recommend to people attending this conference? What can they do? What should they be doing to make connections, to start to make those connections that can lead to other opportunities? Victoria, let me start with you.
I think it's important to, collaborate. We've kind of harped on that a lot today. Figuring out what your, just being clear on what it is that your goals are, identifying what you'll need to accomplish those goals, asking the right questions, maybe trying to shadow individuals, or, asking other people their thoughts, because you may have some blind spots. A lot of times the majority of just, figuring out how to make those connections is in this phase. It's just really understanding, what you're going to need to be successful. And Mr. Glover talked about creativity, using your creativity and going forward with collaboration. I think, those are key elements to making the connections and kind of just getting yourself out there, not worrying about, I would say just getting yourself out there and networking, and making yourself, as competitive as you can, so that you're able to. I kind of lost my train of thought because the lights went out.
No, but you're making good points, and I want to ask Tamara to kind of follow up on that. Again with this conference, because we kind of met really by accident, really. But what would you recommend to people who are attending, in terms of getting connected to other people through an event like this?
Keep in touch. I just saw that on the platform, the WOVA platform. You can connect with people who are on the listening to this today. So I would say definitely keep in touch with people. Let's share what we're doing, and support each other in those efforts, because those are just building blocks of communication, and see where that goes. So for 40 Acre Conservation League, we're hosting Black Conservation Week in May, and I sent the flyer if someone wants to post that. Yeah, and I would love for those to attend. You go to 40acreleague.org for more information, and the physical spaces in California, but we'll also be doing virtual events for those who are not in the state to participate. And if you see something that might be interesting, participate. You'll never know what you'll find in those discussions. I think following up with people who are in this conversation would be very helpful, and letting people know where you are. I'm in California. If someone's interested in talking about what's happening in California, my information's on the HOVA. So find where people are, let yourself be available, and let's build those bridges of communication. And you know, if I know that someone is interested in what U.S. Fish and Wildlife has to offer, being a law enforcement to protect animals, my daughter would love that job. So Miss Owens, I'm going to make sure that that she knows about you and what's possible. Because if you see it, you can imagine yourself in that place.
Exactly.
Chanceé, I'm going to give you the last word because we're just about at time, because you're a veteran. I mean, you and Larry also, but you're a veteran of this conference. Any last words of advice for attendees?
Now, I think I would, one, take advantage of meeting and connecting with other people here, especially if you plan to attend in person on Friday in Silver Spring, and join Nature Forward. I'm letting you know, we need more of you. Okay, we need more of you. I'm just unashamed with it. We need more of you as a part of the organization. There is excellent programming that I feel like we are missing out on. Our community is missing out on. You're attending the conference. Go ahead and go to natureforward.org and join the organization. Check out the programs. There are some awesome programs, workshops, things that you can attend, summer camps for kids. All of those things exist. So if I can say nothing else, one, it is definitely connect with people at the conference on Friday in person. Use that as your opportunity to do some in-person stuff, but also to join this organization. This is an organization that I think is really doing great things and is striving to make progress in areas where we haven't. And already doing great things in the community, just needs a little bit more. It needs a little bit more of us to participate in it, to not only participate as people who are receiving services, but also people who are being able to put more information and kind of steer and guide the direction of the organization as well.
I want to thank everybody. We're out of time. We're a little bit over time, in fact. And again, we could have gone for 2-3 hours. So again, thank you all for sharing your expertise. And we want to thank all of our attendees for watching.